It's been a while since I've done this particular series. If you've seen it before, then you'll know what I mean when I say this is probably the most controversial thing that I do every, I don't know, 6 months or so. Because there's a lot of opinions running around this. Please, if you're still here and haven't skipped forward already, don't just yet until you hear what I'm about to say. If you've already seen these videos before and you know my spiel, go ahead. But if you're at all new, if this is the first or second one, then please understand this is a very particular kind of tier list, and I usually try to avoid even calling it a tier list. Obviously, it has tiers, so it's a tier list. But the point is that this is not ranking how powerful characters are. This is not ranking how good characters are. This is not ranking how smart you are if you use them, right? It's none of those things. So please try and separate out all of those feelings from reading this list. My perspective for this list is I am an officer in tier 1, right? And when my battle group members come to me and ask, who do we need available? This is the kind of thing I think about, right? In each class, we need certain champions. We need more of some of them. Some of them are needs where it's like, oh God, we don't have this character. We need to get one of them immediately because it's actively holding us back. Some are like, ooh, that would be nice. Yeah, go ahead and take him up because that's going to give us some more flexibility. And some are, yeah, actually, I mean, you've got enough attackers. I haven't had any trouble assigning you. You like that character. Go for it. I'll keep them in mind. Maybe we'll assign them somewhere, right? And that's kind of the 3 tiers here. I also have definitions off to the left. Please read them. I'm not going to spend any more time on it. But again, the most important thing here is just that this is not intended to be a tier list of quality. Additionally, a big caveat. You'll notice that neither Patriot nor Leader are on this list because it's just too new, right? We haven't seen any in-season fights with either of them. I do expect both of them to land somewhere in tier 2. That's another important point. Within the tiers, these characters are not in order. So, don't come at me about how Hercules is obviously better than Hulkling. They're in the same tier. I don't care. But with that, let's go ahead and get into it. So, starting with tech, I really do think that Shuri is one of the most important characters in her class. It just comes down to the non-contact is very powerful. She works for Atuma. She works for other things. She's one of the best domino counters, and she doesn't get the dexterity buff, which means there are a whole bunch of nodes that she's just that much better for, including EMP modification and buffet. She's one of the best tech characters for those nodes. You want to have at least one competent Shuri player, right? Shocker has a lot of applications, but probably the most important is Onslaught, and in particular Onslaught on 38. I think Shocker is by far the best answer for that relatively popular fight. You want a big Shocker around, right? Ghost, I don't think I really have to say much. She's cracked in half on Hazard Shift. She is insane with power backs. I probably do need to go ahead and give her the power back. Sorry, that's Prowler, not Ghost. But I do need to give Ghost the power back icon because she's good without them. But her ranking on here is definitely reflective of how cracked they are, right? She would still be useful without them, but she would not be this dominating, yes, use the 6-star over better RPG matchups because of the raw damage without them. Moving on to Prowler, I know this is going to surprise some people because, I don't know, if you listen to certain corners of YouTube, Prowler is just aggressively mid, right? Doesn't do any damage, the utility's not super relevant, except it is. It very much is. All of his beneficial effects being passive, all of the things he does to the opponent being passive instead of debuffs, his dual immunities of bleed and incinerate, and also adding in immunity to falter there, which is really important for node 47. The fact that he gets around power efficiency, of which there are 2 nodes on the map, he's just really, really good. There are a lot of good people using Prowler in Tier 1. The one that I know of who's doing the most that's making it onto YouTube is Bitter Steel. Check out his channel if you want more of that. I actually don't know if he's put up all the videos, but if he hasn't, then go harass Bitter Steel into making more videos, because I know he has the footage. Yeah, Prowler's fantastic. Iron Man is one that we honestly don't send too often, but when we do, he's very important. There are a number of other tech champions who can do a lot of the same things, but Iron Man does most of them more automatically, and he does it while probably outputting more damage and definitely while being tankier. He is just made of bricks. He can block anything. If you actually learn how to parry the opponent's specials, then even better, he can block things forever. He's very, very good. He counters Power Snack, he counters Buffet over time with his armor ups. He's not actually Nullify immune, but he's like halfway there. He's one of the best answers for the second half of Path 6, when you have bishops or any mutant, really. You want to have at least one in your battle group. Omega Sentinel is an interesting one, right? This is probably my most controversial include in Tier 1 here, because we almost didn't assign her this last season. But in my opinion, that's because the current defensive tactic has basically made the meta placements directly work against her. Back in seasons 48 and 49, we sent quite a bit of Omega Sentinel because her Nullify immunity, her incredibly high base attack, her easy access to tracking and heal block, all of these things just make her really, really helpful on the map. But we're not really sending her this tactic because all of the nodes where you need the things that I just talked about tend to have tactic champions on them right now, and she just runs into problems dealing with this tactic, right? She is not a tactic, no tech attacker is. So she's a little bit below where I think she could be. But that's another thing I should have said earlier on. This list is intended to be tactic agnostic. I want to call out who interacts favorably with the tactic, but it is intended to be a list of rank ups that you can make outside of this is what the current tactic is and this is who you need to answer it. That said, anyone on here who is in italics, if you're choosing between them and somebody else, they should get the edge because countering the tactic is important, right? All right, now down to Warlock. I know that this one is also going to be controversial because isn't he just obviously a better character than Omega Sentinel? In some ways, but he's not Nullify immune. He doesn't do the same thing she does, and especially now that we have defensive preset masteries, and top alliances tend to take willpower off of the people placing their best mutants, Warlock can get into some trouble. Because he's a good character, but without the ability to cheese willpower and turn it into a permanent power drain, he's significantly less powerful. And so that's why I have him in Tier 2 here, and with the asterisk, because a lot of his remaining power comes from his immunities and from how well he synergizes with power back boosts. You throw those armor breaks on the opponent, you hit him a bunch of times, it doesn't even really matter how much you crit just because of how many hits there are, you zoom right back up to another special too, right? He's very, very good, but he's not quite what he was. Ultron is another character that we honestly don't send that much of, but at the moment, I would say it's just because for most people he's a 6-star. And honestly, we don't have a lot of ascended Sig 200 Ultrons. He also doesn't answer the current tactic, but like in the future when he does or when it's not slowing him down, all of those immunities and that powerful damage, he is an incredibly strong character that I do think legitimately makes pathing much easier and more flexible because you have this tech champion who can handle 4 different damage types and regen, and has synergies that grant him heal blocks, right? That's a very strong character. It's just you need high Sig for it. Not as many people have invested in the 6-star, and the 7-star is still exceedingly rare. But one day, we're going to have high Sig 7-star Ultrons, and then I'm going to feel pretty good about this placement, I think. Nimrod is another one that I know people are going to be shocked isn't in tier 1. Part of this is the 6-star thing. I know that's going to sound weird because, well, didn't you just say Ultron looks weird or looks worse than this placement because he's a 6-star? Yeah, but he already does exist as a 7-star. And I think he looks fine as a 6-star. It's just he's rare. On the other hand, everyone and their grandmother has Nimrod. A lot of people have him ranked up, and we just don't end up seeing that much of him. You see him from time to time because whenever a mutant placement is vulnerable to him, he deletes it. That's what he does. But there's now an entire path that's built around stopping him. And he's not quite as good for the old hazard shift placements as he used to be. And he doesn't really handle Domino in her most popular placements. He doesn't handle Onslaught, who's one of the most important mutant defenders. And so I really think at this point, tier 2 is where he sits. Viv Vision is another one because she's definitely fragile, right? You have to be careful with her. But if you're boosted the way that you probably are in tier 1, getting through one cycle with her just about kills anything that she should be taking. When you combine that with her instant damage over times, which are automatically passives, basically since her buff, she just feels that much better. She has extra ability accuracy across the board, kind of like Shuri. She is nullify immune as long as she has an armor, like Omega Sentinel. She does an incredible amount of damage. Like Ghost, she can phase for openings instead of needing to parry. She's very, very good. I don't think that she's being used all that much at the moment because she is so fragile, but check out Simula's page for a couple times this season when we did assign Viv and see just how well she does. Future Ant-Man is another one. I think if he comes out as a 7-star, he might go right back up, but I don't think he's answering a lot of the meta placements right now. He had his day when he was, right? When there were a lot of defenders where he could just keep them off a bar of power or at least away from 2 and just delete them with special 2s, right? It doesn't really seem to work out quite that way all that much anymore. And so I think that he is more of a nice to have. If you're really good with him, there are going to be places where you're like, oh yeah, Zane can take that fight. That'll be fine. But they seem fewer than they once were. Lady Deathstrike here, we don't send her that much, but the fact that she just shuts off Unstoppable and Unblockable without it being ability accuracy when she's fighting mutants, the fact that she can take both hazard shift lanes if you're careful with her, and her very easy access to heal block and physical damage in a class that these days has mostly energy, makes her, I think, relevant enough to be here in tier 2. I'm not going to go through, whoops, excuse me, I definitely shouldn't scroll while I'm doing this. I'm not going to go through all of the honorable mentions, but basically it's just important to note that, again, this is not an indictment of any of these characters in the last tier. I really like a lot of them. I've used probably about half of them in War myself, but between how difficult they are to path, how many defenders that you actually see in tier 1 they answer, etc., I think they are more niche or less flexible and therefore need to be down here. Anyway, back to Cosmic. I don't think it's going to surprise anyone when I say Hulkling is in this tier. He's one of the most popular war attackers of all time. Hulkling just goes everywhere. I thought about giving him the power back logo here because that is how most people assign him. But I think he would still be tier 1 without it, right? Like if you delete power back boosts tomorrow, I don't think Cosmic Ghost Rider or Corvus Glaive feel necessary. But based on the fights that I've taken with Hulkling without them in War, I think he still would. Because he does get the power back, right? His rotation is less rigid. He doesn't really have to worry about resetting the way that those others do. And so I haven't given him the indication here. Basically, the only thing slowing Hulkling down this season is the fact that he's not tactic and other Cosmics are. And I've still seen him banned a few times, right? So I don't think I need to spend any more time on that. Hercules, most broken character in the game, gets banned constantly. I don't really think there's a ton to say here. He doesn't directly answer the tactic. He does answer half of it. He still does a ton of damage. He still gets banned a lot. He's still hard to kill. He's Hercules. What is there to say? Cosmic Ghost Rider, like I said, I do think is here because of power backs. I think he's a bit too rigid for war at this level, right? At tier 1 without them. I think he'd still be valuable, right? He has the Damnation, which is the strongest debuff in the game, probably. He has the double immunities. He's very good. But I think power backs are what put him here, right? Because nobody synergizes better with power backs than Cosmic Ghost Rider, and it just allows him to delete stuff without a whole bunch of to-do. There's a reason he's already been blacklisted for this tactic. Corvus Glaive, I don't think I need to justify the power back thing here at all. I've seen him assigned without them, and he does well, but it is definitely rarer, right? He wouldn't be tier 1 without power backs. He would just be good. But between his various pseudo-immunities, because he doesn't have takes 100% less from shock and bleed debuffs, right? And Cold Snap, I think, is the other one. He takes no damage from them. So he's fantastic for Path 3. If you can get him charged at all, he's just an absolute monster. He's tier 1. Now, Venom is an interesting one here, because Venom is mostly raw damage. He doesn't have a ton of utility. The utility he has is good, right? He bypasses Spider-Verse evades, which does come up, mostly because Spider-Ham is annoying. He has those power control immunities against tech. He does a ton of bleed damage. He synergizes really well with his relic. And he has that armor break on the heavy, so I have assigned him for Killmonger before. But the reason he's in tier 1 is that he has all of that, and he has a busted synergy with Scorpion that makes both of them just that much more insane, right? So if you're wondering why he's here, and some of the very good cosmics I'm about to cover are in tier 2, that's the tiebreaker for me. So Gladiator, very good, ton of damage, ton of control, relevant power control immunities, lots of buffs, very good at getting the current tactic up. The big thing here, the reason why he's so at home in tier 2 is because of his SIG ability, right? He just stops armor ups from happening, which makes him a very, very strong answer to the second half of Path 3. And the first, if you're at it, right? But especially the second. He's just very, very good. I don't know if Nagase's done a bunch of war videos, but we sent him to the second half of Path 3 with his rank 3 7-star Gladiator, whose SIG wasn't even that high yet, almost every war this last season to terrific results. So if you're still sleeping on Gladiator, might be time to wake up. Maestro is here because despite the fact that he feels on the slower side for Battlegrounds, he has 3 extremely relevant immunities. He's one of the easiest cosmics to path for Hazard Shift. He has access to Pierce for future Ant-Man, who's a very dangerous defender in general, but especially during this tactic. And he is so hard to kill. I've seen it happen, I'm not going to hide that ball, but Maestro is so tanky that just that combined with his immunities and the fact that over a long fight he has very consistent, reliable damage in the form of bursts rather than debuffs is why he goes here. Angela, I don't think I really need to sell this one. Like, if you have her high SIG, she's basically immune to damaging debuffs. You do have to watch out for deep wounds because top alliances will be placing with that. But especially for the other hazard shifts, she's fantastic. She has that anti-nullify, anti-auto-block clause. She can parry projectiles, which is relevant most of the time, but especially again during this tactic. She's one of the best Shuri counters. She's very, very good at getting clarity up, and she just does really good damage without needing to throw specials. She's Angela. Hyperion I do want to talk about for a minute, because his actual utility I don't think justifies tier 2, but as we've seen more and more 7-star hypes, he does enough damage, he's tanky enough, the reason I have him here is because there are a lot of fights that Hype can take just because he's going to gain enough power. It'll be fine. We've tried that several times and it keeps working out. So I really do think that he adds enough flexibility to the battle group to justify tier 2 here. Null has been amazing this tactic. He has true accuracy on his mediums, which is a huge thing for this tactic, but is generally good. He has really, really good damage. You do not need a max signal for him to have good damage. This is just a complete myth that I keep hearing. He does so much, right? There are a number of different ways that you can play him. It's not terribly important which one you use. Incredible damage, incredible synergy with both Inequity and Despair because of all of the debuffs he puts on the opponent, which makes him harder to kill and that much safer as well. He can control armor through block better than I think anyone else. Just really, really powerful character. Terrax has very relevant immunities, both to shock and bleed and to power control against metal champions. Comes up a lot. He can handle a whole bunch of fights that he's not necessarily the first pick for, but he is a very reliable, tanky option further down the chain. And he answers enough of those that I think he adds flexibility, and that's what this tier is all about. Vox has impressed the heck out of me. I don't think I'm going to get the video done before I leave for Vancouver, which means it's going to have to come out after I get back, honestly. I'm kind of sad about that, but it is what it is. I have my last 2 wars from last season with Vox where I just do some crazy stuff that a lot of people would tell you he probably couldn't do, right? Like take right back at it a bunch of times with him. Take Path 5, which eats his degens. Vox is insane. Like, he's really good with this tactic because he gets the buffs up so quickly, right? Because he can power start one and have an undermine. That's a big part of it. But Vox is also insane because of the damage, because of the immunities, right? Because of the utility. They're going to deserve to be here even going forward. And then again, not necessarily going to go over all of these. There are a lot of really, really good characters in here, right? We've assigned Odin to multiple fights. Galen is helpful, even though he just doesn't really answer a bunch up in tier 1. Adam Warlock, Captain Marvel movie, Silver Surfer are all amazing this tactic. Very, very relevant characters. But I don't think that they necessarily add to flexibility as much as they are just good and they'll be assigned for fights from time to time. So, moving on to Mystic, Kushala has just been fantastic, right? She was aimed pretty squarely at War, but even outside of that, like the way she handles block damage, the way that she can block unblockable, the fact that even when she takes opponents that are Nullify immune, she has access to Soul Barb for another avenue of damage, even if it's reduced. She's been really, really good for this stuff, right? America Chavez is absolutely indispensable. Nobody else has the same kind of ability power rate reduction she has, where it doesn't require a debuff to stick to the opponent. You just have to finish a heavy and you're good to go. It just comes up everywhere, right? She also does a ton of damage and can heal, but that's the big thing, is just her absurd ability power rate control. Absorbing Man we've seen less of because the 6-star punching up against rank 3s has started to run into some problems. But he is still amazing for hazard shift fights, which are often built at least somewhat to slow him down. Anywhere somebody places a defensive armor break, he's at least viable. He still gets used on Path 4 sometimes. I took Maestro on hazard shift several times with him this last season. He's still incredibly relevant, and you need a few competent players with him in your battle group. Werewolf by Night is an interesting one because in terms of direct utility, he doesn't actually answer all that much. But funnily enough, the few things that he does, I think, are what take him from just being a good champ in tier 2 into tier 1. Like that poison reduction, allowing him to take hazard shift, a place where mystics are still struggling a little bit, has just been so relevant. Additionally, the fact that he has physical damage in a class that is mostly energy damage, same thing we said about Lady Deathstrike, has been very, very relevant. And just overall, if you're not familiar with Werewolf's game, being able to gain that much power without hitting the opponent, always relevant. And then we have Symbiote Supreme, who I think is one of the most underrated Titan Pool additions of all time. There are a few of those on this list. But Symbiote's just nuts, right? I think a lot of people know he's good at hunting buff-heavy matchups. I think a lot of people undersell just how good he is against, like, medium buff matchups. The real thing here is that power steal, right? The power steal is incredible, but he also has protection. That's something that has come up a lot recently, because if you're fighting somebody like, say, Serpent, and they're on a node that makes it difficult to avoid their special 3, and you don't want to use an invulnerability boost because of the way Serpent works, well then Symbiote Supreme's protection saying, I can tank it and won't die, but I will take some damage is super, super relevant. And then he just works for all kinds of other stuff. He's very easy to path. One thing I see a lot that people get wrong about him is they're like, okay, he needs bleed and armor break. No, he needs one or the other, right? To deal damage, he needs to be able to either inflict bleed or armor break, and then you just need, like, some buffs for the fight to go well. He's very, very good. Moving on to Diablo. Diablo doesn't have a lot of utility, but if Diablo can take the fight, he's probably amazing for it, and he's probably going to have a tough time dying. Kind of as simple as that, makes things more flexible. Some of y'all may be surprised by Doom's demotion here, but the map overall and defenders are just not really listening for him these days. He's still good. People still assign Doom to fantastic success, but I don't think you miss him in a battle group the way that you used to, and it's more just like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, they have an ascended 6-star Doctor Doom. That'll work. And that's tier 2. Wiccan is one of the best neutralizers. He also has that very relevant armor break immunity, which comes up a lot on path 4. Do really strong damage. He can block unblockables. The battle group is made stronger by having a good Wiccan player. Longshot is so underrated on offense. There are only a few places that I would send Longshot on offense, honestly. He was boosted by the last tactic, less so this time. But the places I would send him, he just demolishes, right? They're like 25-second fights against rank 3 defenders. He's so good. The extra ability accuracy, the fact that he ramps faster through his dupe, the Fate Seal on the special 2, just nuking things through Nullify immunity. He's amazing. Hood is still really, really good, but he is starting to slow down as a 6-star, right? There was a time when I had him in tier 1, and I felt very strongly about it. But at this point, honestly, the reason he's still in tier 2 is kind of because of his synergy with Kingpin, making him easier to assign. He has the Fate Seal, but he's just not as fast as Longshot in getting it up. He still has the ability accuracy reduction. He still has the power steal, but it's not a super reliable power steal. Hood's still really good, but you have to be a bit more careful with him than you once did. Kindred is in tier 2 because of his immunities, bluntly. He's one of the mystics that can chase a lot of characters onto hazard shift nodes. And as long as he's fighting a buff-heavy Cosmic, which is what they were designed to do, they're going to be fine. Tigra I still have here. I have demoted her from tier 1 because I just don't think that she's that important anymore. A lot of characters are somewhat resistant to what she does. She's still great if you have a really capable Tigra player. She does make pathing easier, but that's tier 2, right? You're not sad if you don't have her in the battle group, I don't think, which is what tier 1 is. White Tiger I have down here. I don't know how to feel about this, right? I was on the fence on putting White Tiger in tier 1. We're not assigning her as much without the previous tactic. That extra ability power rate reduction was really good for her. And so she did fall off a little bit there. The prowesses were juicing her as well. But she's still really, really good. She's still the only mystic that's immune to Nullify, and that comes up. She still has really good power steal, really good damage, really good healing control that also juices her back up, right? She's incredible against gore, like one of the best gore counters in the game. And so she does make things more flexible, for sure. And then again, really great characters, not as easy to assign anymore. I still have Magic on here because she's overpowered as a 5-star, but 5 stars punching up these days I don't think is wise. Anyway, moving on to science, I don't think I need to justify Titania. She's just insane. Throws damage at the opponent, goes indestructible, unblockable, and unstoppable. Silk also does a lot of damage, then has the safety net of her evade, has the fact that she doesn't get the dexterity mastery when she dodges back. She doesn't even use the dexterity mastery to dodge back, so she can handle characters that turn it off. She has a really good slow, easy access to stun, and heavy, just very powerful character. Photon continues to be great. She's bleed immune, which comes up a lot. She's neutralize immune, which comes up sometimes. She has that passive petrify when she applies a debuff, which handles Conflictor and Masochism really well. And she just generally does a lot of damage as she gets going. Very strong attacker. Spider-Man 2099, I think, has kind of been back on the ascendant. Funnily enough, things have kind of evolved where he's not the I'll just take everything that he once was, but he's kind of reasserted just how good he is in his niche. Things have evolved against some of the other science characters, and they just haven't really slowed him down, right? So that's why I have him back up here. We assign him almost every war, which isn't true for everybody. Scorpion, often banned. You do often want to have him with Venom because while he's fine without it, the longer the fight goes, the more likely it is that something goes wrong for him. He's not really built for marathons. He's a little bit finicky, but he has enough utility that especially when you combine him with the Venom or Agent Venom synergies, then his damage just becomes broken, overtuned, and then his utility is more than enough to win a bunch of fights, right? So he's absolutely tier 1. That's why he keeps getting banned. Luke Cage, I'm ready for the fights, bring him on. He's an incredible war attacker. He's bleed immune, that's huge. He has that 150% concussion against Mystics anywhere that they're not getting rid of debuffs, and even a few places where they are. Luke is just incredible. Like, my favorite Kindred counter in the entire game, completely turns off the threats. He's just flat out good. Check out Clowniest Clowns page if you want to see some more. We assigned his rank 2 dupe to Luke Cage a while back. But yeah, Luke is great. Ant-Man has really relevant immunities that allow him to take Hazard Shift. He's buff immune, that's huge as well. And then just generally has solid damage and utility with that glancing and the miss counter it provides him. Quicksilver is insane. He has counters to evade, unstoppable, and miss through his slow. Does a ton of damage, incredible ability, power rate control. Very strong character, especially now that he's a 7-star. Hulk is nuts. He doesn't really answer things, but if fights don't stop Hulk, he just wins. He also can be buff immune if you bring Silver Surfer, who I think is a very viable attacker, as I said earlier. So he makes things more flexible. Cassie's here for a lot of the same reasons as Ant-Man. She generally has, a little bit more damage output, is also a little bit more fragile. I see them as somewhat similar. Human Torch is still here because of just how much damage he does, but also because he has built-in healing control and anti-miss, right? But you're definitely taking some risks assigning him these days. He's gotten a lot smaller relative to the Defenders. I don't assign a ton of Void, but basically every time it comes up that I do, I go, oh, thank God, that makes that so much easier. That's why he's tier 2, right? The Incinerate immunity is helpful in making him just that much more relevant, but also his utility, his anti-ability power rate, his anti-regen, it's fantastic. And once it gets rolling, nobody really stops it. Great honorable mentions here. The one I do want to talk about specifically is Mr. Fantastic, because I have used him a ton in the past. Basically, A large part of this is that Reed isn't really answering tactics all that much lately. And so, because of that, he hasn't been a first choice for science. And then you just run into a lot of his best target defenders are put in places that make debuffs difficult to apply or make it difficult to parry consistently, right? And so then you're fishing for heavy counters, and he just generally becomes a little bit harder to path. There are still a bunch of fights, even meta fights, that he's great for, but he just doesn't answer the current Mystic placements the way that he used to as the map has evolved, and so that's why he's down here. Still, all it takes is a tactic that asks for you to use him, and suddenly I think I'm definitely going to be using him again. Him coming out as a 7-star would probably change things for me as well, but I knew that there were going to be some questions about me demoting one of my favorite characters, and so I figured I had to address it. Same basic idea with Quake as with Magic. Don't use 5 stars in Tier 1 War. Like, sure you can, but you can also just learn the fight with someone else. I don't know. I'm not going to spend too much time there. Probably going to get at least one angry comment for it. Say la vie. Skill, I'm going to be completely honest. I considered just moving on to Tier 2 after Kate, because no other skill character is assigned like her. And that means, like, I know that that is a direct result of her being overtuned. I don't hide that. For those of you who don't know, who are new to this channel, I designed Kate myself. And I definitely, like, she hit her goals. She had one too many goals, right? She shouldn't have been a Battlegrounds Duke, which would have dropped her damage in war, made her a little bit harder to use, and then she wouldn't be used for freaking everything the way that she is right now. That's my bad. I'll own it. We can't really do anything about it right now because it wasn't super obvious until it was too late, and yeah, I'm not going to get into any of that. Point being, you want a bunch of people who know how to use Kate Bishop in your battle group. You just slap advanced power boosts on them and she destroys things because, yeah, that's how it works. She also has been pretty good against this current tactic because you get the anti-evade, and then just as long as you are careful with the auto block, she does great. Cheelth, though, was the first one I thought of after Kate as far as just feeling that relevant. The cleanse is super helpful whenever there's a Jessica Jones around. She does tons of bleed damage. Her Tranquilize is super strong. Her Grit is super strong in dealing with Unstoppable. It's very easy to assign Cheelth, and especially if you pair her with Hulk, who I already mentioned. If the fight doesn't stop Hulk, he wins. And a team of Cheelth, Hulk, and Silver Surfer can take a lot of ground. Black Cat we only send to a few fights, but she demolishes the ones that she takes. She can work for Photon in certain places. She basically hunts down and destroys Thing. Does a ton of damage, just really, really strong attacker. Crossbones is one of the only characters who can reduce the opponent's defensive ability accuracy by more than 100%, which is very helpful for Path 4. He has great debuff control if his SIG is high. Even if he doesn't, he just does a ton of damage. And he's also one of the only skill champions with ready access to buffs, which is very helpful with this current tactic. Mole Man, like Null, starts with his true accuracy already online, making it a lot easier to ramp in this tactic. He synergizes absurdly well with powerbacks, honestly well enough that he's getting the tag too, as we're talking about it. But yeah, Mole Man is nuts, especially now that he's back as a 7-star. Very easy to assign, shock immune, incredible character. Now, Mantis in Tier 2 I thought about, but she just handles photons so well almost anywhere that I had to leave her here. There are a few other fights that she's good for, don't get me wrong. She can take science on hazard shift, but she's so good for photon that I think she does make pathing more flexible. Falcon, he's simple, but he's incredible. Turns off nodes, including hazard shift. Great with this current tactic. Blade I do want to talk about for a minute because people have forgotten how good he is. He basically has built-in powerbacks with the way that he interacts with the bleeds he puts on the opponent. He can apply those bleeds by parrying specials, which makes ramping that much easier. just does a ton of damage. Strong character in general. Basically, I would happily assign him anywhere that he either has class advantage or danger sense, is how I feel about it. The class advantage part I want to spend a minute on, because danger sense, if I remember correctly, is I think 45% extra attack. Class advantage is 40% extra attack, right? So you're basically getting against any science defender almost the same attack bonus that you would against a dimensional being who wasn't science. Now, the fact that you get both against Spot, who's a relevant defender, is part of why Blade is on tier 2, because Spot could be problematic and you can just throw Blade at him. But he's also not that hard to path because of other science and dimensional abilities, or dimensional beings, that he can hunt down very well. Plus, you throw actual power backs on top of him and he just pops off with them. Bullseye's utility has been incredible in war. Shocker. He has a bunch of it. He can power start for true accuracy. He has automatic anti-miss. He has his guaranteed crits. He's great. Moondragon has been less popular since Sturdy. But I've seen what she can do, and if you have if you have a player in your battle group who is comfortable with Moondragon, especially a duped Moondragon, she is making your pathing that much more flexible. It's not necessarily common, so I can understand that she would stick out as an include here, but I've had that before, and it is very helpful, right? Another thing to call out is that she's one of the only science characters one of the only skill characters who places a lot of long duration debuffs on the opponent, and that allows her to control healing through despair. That combined with what the rest of what she does just makes her great. Shang-Chi has been used less, still great at hunting down Jessica, still great at hazard shift, still great at just deleting people with special 2s. Valkyrie, definitely less relevant than she once was, but can still win entire fights into block. She can gain combo into block, which is incredible this current tactic. Just a very, very strong character as long as you are comfortable working around the AI. Nick Fury I have bolded here to talk about because he once was higher, right? And I thought about dropping him lower. Honestly, the reason Nick is still here is because of how automatic his debuff control is on path 4. He just knocks the opponent down with a heavy, either at the start of the fight or after, countering a special attack, and non-dots are gone, which is a lot of the threats on that path. That's really, really strong. And so that's why he's still here. It's for that utility. It's not for the damage. His damage is still good, but I don't think that it is exceptional the way it once was. It's just really solid, and then you combine that with his ability to control debuffs by knocking the opponent down, and you have somebody who makes pathing much easier. And again, nothing against these next few champions, but they're just a little bit harder to path, or a little bit less relevant these days. Kingpin is still great. We assign Kingpin every other war or so at SSX. The reason he's in this last tier for me is because these days there are other characters who can do almost everything he can do without having to bring Hood along. And Hood is great, but Hood can't necessarily fit on all of the paths that you want to take Kingpin to, and so I do think that duo has fallen off a little bit over time. Still great, but that's why he's in tier 3 here. Alright, on to mutants. There's an argument that this tier could have just consisted of Onslaught. He's incredible. He does pretty much anything you need a mutant to be able to do in war. He has, super resistances against bleed, against shock, against incinerate. His special one applies even through block, which comes up a fair amount. It has extra ability accuracy, which can get around glancing. He's just a really, really strong character, right? There are a bunch of nodes that say, no, you can't apply your debuffs. He goes, oh, sweet, so I just ramp faster. Onslaught's incredible. I don't think I need to convince y'all of that. Havoc is here in part because of how well he counters Onslaught, right? That is a very relevant assignment that comes up a good chunk of the time. But then on top of that, Havoc is supercharged by Hazard Shift. He's very relevant there. He's one of the best possible Horseman targets. And he just kind of deletes things. Havoc is very, very good in ways that are a little bit difficult to directly quantify if you haven't used him a lot. But as the owner of a rank 3 Havoc, I think you absolutely need somebody with at least a rank 2 somewhere in your battle group. And then Negasonic, this one might be a little controversial because I know not everybody likes assigning her. She is on the squishier side. I don't think she is too squishy to justify not using her incredible utility, though. She answers so many skill champions, especially on nodes where they are placed to kind of dodge other mutants, punish debuffs, and she just doesn't have debuffs, right? So as long as you are comfortable using someone who you probably shouldn't eat a special with, she's great. And that goes for a lot of these characters, but I did just want to talk about it for that reason in particular. But yeah, I think Negus, you want a probably duped, ideally, but yeah, you want a Negasonic available to Path. Iceman still has triple immunities, still has evade control. I don't find myself reaching for him as much, but he definitely makes pathing easier. Omega Red requires some extra support, right? You need somebody who really knows how to use Omega Red. You probably want either Sabretooth or Deadpool with him on the team. But as long as you can do that, he can just kind of bulldoze through a bunch of otherwise very difficult fights, which makes pathing easier, right? Professor X, similarly, you probably want to ramp him to do really big fights at the end, like bosses. You want power backs for sure. Oh, yeah, excuse me. You want power backs for sure, I said. And you want somebody who's comfortable getting to that special 3 without dying, because that's not always trivial. But he's just really, really good. Dust only shows up in a few places, but glancing on blocks turns off a lot of things, generally makes her tankier. She synergizes decently with power backs, even though her actual cash out is the special 1. She has physical damage in a class that's leaning more towards energy again these days. She's a really solid she's a really solid Atuma counter with physical damage, which comes up sometimes on that node in particular. High energy diet, really strong character. Toad is incredible. Toad is one of the best Nick Fury counters. Toad eats Kingpin. Toad eats Zemo. He basically should only be used for skill champions in war, but for a lot of skills, he just melts them. Apocalypse is still great. If you have a big Ascended one, he's good enough with powerbacks, even though they don't listen for his red numbers, that you can kind of bulldoze through some fights. But these days, while he's punching up, and while his utility isn't asked for as much or is directly countered by champions and their placements, he's just not what he once was. He did get a bit of a boost in the fact that he can now bring Sinister along, who is significantly better than Kang and Cable were. But Sinister kind of overlaps with a lot of the things Apocalypse is doing, and so that's not always huge, right? This also just made me realize, because, God, there's so many mutants, that I didn't put Mr. Sinister down here, and he is definitely a solid Tier 3 option. Archangel is just running into more immunities these days, or more characters who have extra ability accuracy, turn things off. He doesn't turn off tactics anymore, almost ever, because we learned our lesson. But at the same time, if he can take a fight, he probably turns it off and kills them very quickly. So, Tier 2. And then, yeah, there's just a bunch of great mutants, like I said. I haven't seen a ton of Mr. Sinister gameplay, and he kind of cares about his paths. But he absolutely can work, and he does a bunch of damage without having to gain too much power, which, as I said for Werewolf, automatically good. The thing is, a lot of these characters are kind of like solid, but then get boosted by tactics, right? Literally, almost all of these, not Magneto, but Bishop, Danny, Emma, Storm, Colossus, and Sunspot were all boosted so much by the last tactic that benefited them that most of them got banned somewhere or another, right? So they're all very viable. Weapon X is great for Bullseye, that comes up. Sauron is so underrated. He cheeses Hazard Shift, let's be honest, but the way he cheeses Hazard Shift is really good. And then I do want to address Kitty here for a minute, because I think we've somehow looped all the way back around where she was overrated for so long that now she's underrated. There are risks to assigning Kitty, right? Especially if you don't have, the Magneto House of X pre-fight to ramp her faster, or Tigra to send her unblockable. There are risks. But she's still Kitty Pryde, right? She still has the ability to take no damage while dashing forward. She still can just cycle special threes against miss counters. She's still really, really strong. So I don't want her to be underrated either. I've seen her do a whole bunch of things that would have been trouble for other champions, and she just does them almost automatically, as long as you have somebody who's good with her. So just wanted to shout that out. And that's getting us through all classes. I want to just call out, I've put like my 4 most important for each of the tactics, but this is a really good tactic list right now, right? You can definitely take fights with Clarity attackers outside of these 8. If you feel like your Clarity champions are weak and you want to add something to them, maybe pick one of these, but be careful of bans, right? CGR is already gone. Some of these others may be as well. But wanted to give that, and then as I talked about, Kate, Hercules, and Hulkling all handled the tactic decently well. And so they are worth having on hand for this particular season, too. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed this one. This always generates a lot of comments, so I'm not even going to worry about telling you to leave them. But I look forward to the discussion. This is always an interesting one. I know this is a weird tier list. It's a weird framing for things, but it's one that's particularly helpful for me. It's particularly helpful for my alliance, I think. Like, in specifically when they ask, who do you want ranked up, I can answer them because I think about things this way. And also it's helpful for me as a designer, because I think this is very important for, like, why are these characters so helpful in war? How can I make somebody who is also helpful in war? Anyway, look forward to the discussion, and until next time, thank you so much for watching, and take care.